Testing, testing. Okay. So we're back on the record for case 9715. Mr. Borkowski.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The first presentation we have today is Dwayne Rager from Chaberton Energy.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. For the record, my name is Dwayne Rager, and I am here on behalf of Chaberton Energy. For your awareness, we did not file any formal written comments, so we'll just be providing some oral testimony to you today, just in case you were looking for that. Now, I'm sure that you may know who we are, but just in case you don't, Chaberton Energy is a solar energy developer focused on distributed generation. Situated in the heart of Rockville, we're proud to be a leading community solar developer here in Maryland. We have nearly 200 megawatts of community solar, commercial solar, and storage in active development here in Maryland. With a total development pipeline of 1.5 gigawatts, we are one of the fastest growing energy companies in the nation and are proud to be ranked 34th on the 2024 Inc. 5000 list. Chaberton Energy is here to offer its deep appreciation to the continued efforts of the work group and our support for the joint proposal from the Maryland Exelon Utilities and Solar Energy Industries Association. I think you heard yesterday that it's not every day you see industry and utilities come to you hand in hand, so we're excited about this opportunity. This proposal is a strong step forward in bringing storage to the distribution grid. It will help Maryland meet its 2028 goal of 750 megawatts while accounting for the 3 to 4 year development cycles you typically find here in Maryland. It will do this while allowing the work group to continue developing a longer-term storage program. The proposal will help Maryland achieve resiliency and alleviate peak hour costs as the projected load growth occurs in the coming years. It will especially help to reduce the cost of purchasing peak generation from PJM resources in the short term. Peaker plants that sit idle for most of the year lead to increased costs for Maryland ratepayers. This proposal will instead supply Maryland with cheaper in-state resources at a lower cost than constructing and maintaining additional peaker plants. By way of example, we understand that new natural gas plants cost upward of $2,000 per kilowatt, while the price of battery energy storage systems is lower than about $250 per kilowatt. More simply, storage systems are over 8 times less expensive. Additionally, storage systems are more readily available and take on average 2 years less time to develop and place into service than a combined cycle gas plant. Unlike PJM assets providing peak power from other states, these storage systems would be 100% located in Maryland, paying Maryland taxes and supporting Maryland communities. Chaberton has already submitted 2 standalone storage interconnection applications to PEPCO in direct response to this effort, and based on PEPCO's recent request for information, Chaberton is actively looking to develop additional storage projects in those areas identified. In addition to the proposal before you, Chaberton supports third-party ownership to facilitate efficiency of developing these storage projects and provide ratepayer benefits. We also stress that our financial partners require certainty in the tariff and revenue structure in order to meet investment thresholds. Given the parallel nature of this effort with that of the Energy Storage Work Group, a temporary tariff may be called for that covers this program. Again, I'll keep it short and sweet. I thank you again for the opportunity. Chaberton Energy encourages to implement this thoughtful proposal, and happy to take any questions.
Well, I think I have to start with Commissioner Barve, who was very excited to hear somebody from Rockville here.
Oh, yeah. Everybody from Rockville is awesome.
In your former legislative district.
That's right. All of the people in my building think I still represent them. So, okay. So those numbers that you gave us with respect to the cost of building a gas plant versus battery storage. Where'd you get those numbers? Can you write them down? Can you submit them to the commission so that we can look at the sources for those calculations? Because obviously this is the argument of the decade.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to follow up with my development team and get those numbers to you. I can send them to staff so they can share those with you. And our sources, yes.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you for being here today. You're probably aware that we had David Murray here from Turning Point, and he talked to us. So I was really interested in this idea that the community solar program is interesting, these type of developments. Can you just give me a little more understanding? How do you blend, I guess, community solar, which is a net metering concept, and it's a retail at rates and providing, I guess, direct services to its subscribers, how that works and how, I guess this would benefit having the community solar program blending with the storage program, I guess the subscribers, and overall, are you going to provide services to the wholesale market with the storage, or just if you could just help me understand a little more?
Sure.
How this is going to work.
Absolutely. And I think, the short answer is we're still figuring a lot of this out, but there is a real opportunity for us to incorporate storage with our projects, so that way we can offset some of the costs and the needs during peak hours especially.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And happy to provide any additional information along with what we'll submit on those numbers to staff, as follow-up if you would like any additional follow-up.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to, I think hybrid projects are what we need in this state. And just interesting, again, to know how the business model develops. And again, specifically how this will benefit the net metering, the subscriber, I guess.
Absolutely.
Customer. Thank you.
And
Thank
Chaberton won't be going anywhere, so we'll be in touch throughout the process.
you. Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so to follow up on my colleague's questions, you had mentioned the idea of a temporary tariff. Separate and apart from a tariff, how have you thought about how you can make these projects economic from your perspective, and what additional assistance would you need in making these projects work?
No, thank you for the question. As we come off of the heels of the end of that legislative session, I personally haven't had time to touch base with our development team on that, but I would be happy to do so and follow up with you.
Okay, so I would encourage you. I mean, we've sort of over the course of yesterday, sort of speaking to the utilities and talking to them about what we would like to see in sort of the next iteration of these proposals. You may want to touch base with the utilities to talk about your ideas of what you could do in helping them to do the things that storage will do best, which is to sort of deal with some of our resource adequacy issues, and to try to deal with constraints on the grid, either because we need more infrastructure or because of peak challenges. So I mean, this is an opportunity for your company, I believe, to kind of move forward. I share the enthusiasm of my fellow commissioners that that this could be a very good way of sort of moving community solar forward, and so I would encourage you to touch base with them and figure out how we can sort of move this process going forward. The one thing I do want to caution is it's a little if the point of comparing the cost of storage versus a new gas plant is to talk about how to deal with peak, you can do that kind of cost comparison, but remember that storage doesn't generate electricity, so it can be apples and oranges. So the numbers may look very good, but I mean, storage stores electricity that's been generated by another generator. If you're trying to solve for peak challenges, and then you can buy power off-peak and store it, that is an apples versus apples. So we just have to be careful when we're making cost comparisons that we keep it to the thing you're trying to solve. And I think that sort of goes back to my point that storage is a tool. It's a tool to help solve problems, and then it's sort of what you're trying to solve.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Brokowski, next.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have the Office of People's Counsel, Alexis Lewis from OPC, and then Nagoyan from Synapse.
And Commissioners, Mark Shebus from Office of People's Counsel is here as well. It's first name M-A-R-K, last name S as in Sam, Z as in Zebra, Y, B as in Box, I-S-T.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. OPC appreciates the opportunity to discuss the utility procurement proposals and next steps regarding the Maryland Energy Storage Program. Given the imminent gubernatorial approval of HB 1035 and the comments from other MESP participants, OPC would like to emphasize the following. First, the need to prioritize the establishment of a robust cost-effectiveness framework as soon as possible to balance ratepayer impacts and achieve the statutory deadlines. And second, the significance of commission-prescribed criteria and allocation requirements so the commission can adequately assess and select proposed procurements with affordability and equity in mind. Regarding my first point on cost effectiveness, the UBCA should serve as a blueprint to prevent impermissible wealth shifting from ratepayers to utilities. So data is really key here, and each proposed procurement mechanism should include a BCA. This will allow, as I mentioned previously, the comparison of projects while maintaining the statutory mandate of cost effectiveness. And given the potential after HB 1035 passes for increased utility ownership, a framework for cost effectiveness is even more important to minimize the potential for anti-competitive behavior given the nascency of the storage market in Maryland. This will also assist with devising a pricing model, and we agree with the Commission that storage should be about avoided costs and targeted achievements. So for that reason, we respectfully request that the Commission direct the work group to prioritize what is included in this BCA, specifically the costs and benefits. This is essential for the Commission to approve procurements and allocate costs commensurate with said benefits. Additionally, the Commission should consider establishing a ratepayer impact threshold similar to that which is in the OREC statute and requires submission of ratepayer impact analyses with these procurement proposals. OPC also believes ownership should be based on cost effectiveness and ability to perform, and thus a discussion of DERMS capabilities should be considered and included when discussing distribution benefits. Now to my second point regarding criteria and allocation requirements, we request the Commission prescribe procurement selection criteria and other safeguards to maximize net benefits. We believe the proposals should be operating on a framework that achieves the greatest value. These plans that were submitted need more detail, as was mentioned yesterday, and we would like to see concrete descriptions of what will be achieved through these proposals. Some suggested criteria include benefit cost results. So as was done in the pilot program, a ratio score for benefit cost analysis, the total estimated benefits, as mentioned previously, ratepayer impact tests, as well as distributional equity analyses of the bill impact for each procurement in individual utility territories. And so the Commission can determine if the cost should be recovered via a limited income mechanism, so to ensure that the burden does not fall disproportionately on low-income communities. Other suggestions include discussion of what the expected revenue streams are, and if there's participation in the PJM markets, what the status in the interconnection queue is, and expected interconnection date. And regarding renewable energy, if it's paired with solar, what will the installed capacity be of the paired energy system? And very importantly, timeliness. What is the length of time from notice of award to project online date? These are just certain suggestions of what could be included in the commission prescribed criteria. And regarding cost allocation, staff and other parties have recommended that distribution connected storage, the budget should be allocated commensurate with sales, and so that all program costs are paid in a manner consistent with usage. OPC generally supports this, but we also suggest that sales-based target allocations be weighted by capacity clearing prices of the different PJM zones in Maryland, so that it takes into account capacity constraints. We will note, however, that this works well for storage that's participating in the PJM markets, but is less so applicable to those that are not. Finally, at least for me, we agree with the discussion yesterday that establishing a regulatory asset is, in essence, kicking the can down the road. So as far as alternative cost recovery methods, we urge the Commission to get a sense of what the cost is first before approving a cost recovery mechanism. And we believe that if a regulatory asset is approved, it should be recovered at the cost of debt, not the weighted average cost of capital. We believe that the cost should be amortized as, the cost should be recovered as they are incurred, and if they're amortized, they should only be amortized to protect against rate shock. One of our main concerns with a regulatory asset is that it creates a perverse incentive for anti-competitive behavior, since the utilities would be incentivized for higher contract costs because they can rate base it later. So to combat this, we also suggest that the utilities be required to share bid data and evaluation methodology with the Commission and with staff and OPC under a confidentiality agreement, so that we have more transparency into the process. Furthermore, if it's determined that limited income mechanisms are appropriate, those should be instituted to avoid inequitable distribution of costs. But finally, one point we would like to emphasize about cost recovery is that it's not necessarily about performance per se, but rather prudence at all levels of the implementation of these proposals. So is the plan prudent? Is the process prudent? Is the execution prudent? And if there is not that demonstration of prudence, recovery should be disallowed. And with that, I turn it over to Tan.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm going to speak a little bit more in detail on the distribution-connected storage proposal and then the transmission-connected storage proposals from the utilities. So first, on the distribution-connected piece, there's been a lot of discussion yesterday about storage as this revolutionary resource that can provide many different kinds of benefits to the grid, from peak shaving to reliability to avoiding distribution system upgrades, and storage can provide these benefits. However, these benefits are not guaranteed. They require appropriate processes and capabilities in place to actually be delivered. So focusing on the distribution benefits of storage, utilities and industry spoke a lot yesterday about how distribution-connected storage can be used to meet localized system constraints and defer the need for distribution system upgrades. However, these benefits can only be fully realized, meaning that the deferral of distribution upgrades is incorporated into the utility's distribution system operations and planning if the utility can identify local system constraints and the timing of these local peaks at those locations, which can vary across the utility system. And also ensure that distribution-connected storage resources are dispatched at those specific locations at those specific times. The timing of local peaks do not necessarily line up with the system peak, and the further downstream on the system you are, meaning the closer to homes and businesses, the timing of local peaks are increasingly variable and can be difficult to predict. And so to address this, the utility would need to have adequate visibility and appropriate control of its distribution assets, and also if enabling third parties to own and dispatch storage have appropriate systems and procedures in place to have visibility into the operations of these assets and verify storage dispatch. And thus far, the utilities have not demonstrated that they have the appropriate DER, distributed energy resources management and control capabilities to support this kind of operation. The Exelon utilities' experience with distribution-connected storage so far through the pilot program has focused on peak shaving and participating in PJM markets, mainly for ancillary services, not distribution benefits. And in BGE's multi-year rate plan, in their project list, there is a distributed energy resource management system, or DERMS, implementation project. And the problem statement for this project reads, and I quote, "The current solution for monitoring and controlling BGE's DER assets involves a custom real-time calculation in the distribution SCADA system, which requires manual maintenance and is not scalable to meet the DER growth expected in the near future." And with the utilities proposing 150 megawatts of distribution-connected storage, this presents a very significant increase in the capacity of distribution-connected storage on the utility system. And that said, there are still reasons to deploy distribution-connected storage, even without fully realizing these distribution benefits. So first, distribution-connected batteries can be used to address system peak, as we've heard, and reduce capacity costs, which are high currently and expected to be high going forward. And system peak hours are easier to be identified and predict than all the different local distribution peaks on the system. And second, distribution-connected batteries can be deployed more quickly than transmission-connected batteries, since they do not need to go through the PJM interconnection process usually. And to ensure that deployment of distribution-connected batteries provide the promised benefits and result in the best outcomes for ratepayers, the Commission should require utilities' procurement plans to include detailed discussions of their capabilities to deliver any claimed benefits of these storage resources. We are aware that the Commission had a recent order in case number 9778 regarding the implementation of FERC Order 2222 and virtual power plants in Maryland. This order requires the utilities to provide reports on their DERMS plans in 6 months, and so the utilities' distribution-connected storage procurement plan should be aligned with this report. And lastly, for the benefit cost analyses of these storage resources for distribution-connected batteries, these should only include distribution benefits to the extent that the utilities can demonstrate that they have the sufficient capabilities, including through the use of DERMS, or otherwise to deliver those benefits. And over to the transmission-connected storage. I want to discuss the difference between full tolling versus partial tolling for ratepayers. So just to do a little bit of review, under a full tolling agreement, a developer would construct a storage resource, and that includes going through the PJM interconnection process and enabling PJM market participation. And the utility would then enter into a contract with this developer to provide contracted payments to the developer over a specified period, say 15 years, with the contract costs recovered from ratepayers. The utility would then fully control the operations of the storage resource and participate in PJM markets, including capacity, energy, and ancillary services. and the utility and ultimately ratepayers keep these revenues from PJM market participation. And the Exelon utilities also proposed a profit-sharing mechanism under which the utilities would keep 30% of any wholesale revenues that exceed annual contract costs, with the rest benefiting ratepayers. I will discuss this in more detail a little later. Now, for the partial tolling agreement, similar to full tolling, a developer would still construct the storage resource and complete PJM interconnection requirements. The utility would still enter into a contract with the developer to provide contracted payments over a specified period, and contract costs are recovered from ratepayers. However, the difference is that the contracts would only cover capacity and the capacity value of the storage resource and the associated capacity market revenues. And the developer would be responsible for participating in the energy and ancillary services markets and would own the revenues from those markets. So under a partial tolling agreement, the utility and ratepayers do not keep the energy and ancillary services revenues, but contract costs would be lower than those for a full tolling agreement. So for example, in California, they have resource adequacy contracts, which are similar to partial tolling agreements for energy storage, and those have had average costs of about $6 to $8 per kilowatt month, while California's all attributes contracts, which are more similar to full tolling agreements, have had average costs of around $7 to $22 per kilowatt month. So the relative benefits to ratepayers between a full versus partial tolling agreement depend on the difference between the increase in contract costs, stepping up from a partial to full tolling agreement, and the energy and ancillary services revenues. So if you have a full tolling agreement, if energy and ancillary revenues are higher than the increase in contract costs compared to a partial tolling agreement, then ratepayers are better off under the full tolling agreement. However, if energy and ancillary services revenues are lower than the increase in contract costs, then ratepayers would have been better off under a partial tolling agreement. And so overall, a partial tolling agreement can reduce ratepayer risk to wholesale market price relative to a full tolling agreement, since partial tolling only covers the value of capacity. And also, the Next Gen Act requires partial tolling agreement for transmission-connected storage procurements. However, the Act does not preclude full tolling agreements, and so we recommend that the utilities perform benefit cost analysis for both partial tolling and full tolling arrangements to enable a comparison of potential costs and benefits to ratepayers. And now, regarding the utilities profit-sharing mechanism, under the proposed framework, if wholesale market revenues exceed annual contract costs, the utilities will keep 30% of the net revenues. However, if wholesale market revenues are less than annual contract costs, there is no sharing of the costs, and net costs will be recovered entirely from ratepayers. This is problematic because the risk is asymmetric. Ratepayers only receive 70% of net revenues if market revenues exceed contract costs, but will be on the hook for 100% of net costs if market revenues are lower than annual contract costs, and utilities will still be allowed to recover the full contract costs plus their return through the regulatory asset mechanism that they proposed. And additionally, wholesale market prices are volatile, meaning that market revenues can exceed contract costs in any given year without any correlation to utility performance. And therefore, the Commission should either reject the proposed profit-sharing mechanism or adopt a risk-sharing mechanism under which utilities are also responsible for a portion of net costs if market revenues are lower than annual contract costs. Thank you, and I look forward to the Commission's questions.
Okay, Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Your very extensive remarks were much appreciated by me. So, the way I've been kind of approaching this really is, we have both the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative, okay, which was initially what you all were working on, and then the legislature then just enacted the Next Generation Act. So I wanted to ask you first a question. I've been kind of approaching this with a bright line between the two. There seems to be an opportunity. We've heard largely from, I think Merrick provided their testimony. There are a number of projects that are in the PJM queue right now. They do have, capacity accreditation value, and they can have a near-term, lowering impact of capacity prices, and there is enough of it in our queue right now that it could have a significant impact, and it's been reported it could be ready in a couple of years. So if we were to just first approach that and try to take advantage of what tools we might have available to us to try to get those over the finish line, would that be a good approach, just to go ahead and have per the Next Generation Act, have that, I don't know what we're calling it, an auction, or have some kind of a procurement, I guess procurement is the right word, really along the lines of the how we handle offshore wind and those OREC credits. Is that something, if we had a full, proceeding, an opportunity for parties to look at all the proposals and then go ahead and find out if any of those proposals merited some kind of an incentive? Does that approach, again, have we that bright line, I guess satisfy some of the concerns, the cost-benefit concerns that you've talked about for the MESI program, but also would allow us to act quickly to try to get some of these programs, developed, these opportunities developed within the next 2 years. I'm just interested to know if you would, I guess, support that kind of an approach. Again, a bright line between the MESI and the Next Generation Act.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Commissioner. I think that's something that warrants additional discussion amongst the stakeholders, especially with how recent the Next Generation Act is, and especially with the many problems with the PJM capacity market, as well as the backlog in the queue. So I think that's something we could consider discussing, and we'd be happy to provide supplemental comments afterwards to further elaborate our office's position on that. Mark, Pam, do you guys have anything to that?
I can weigh in, and Tan, if you do as well. Commissioner Risch, I first want to just make sure I understand the question. You're talking about a sort of transmission-connected focused procurement that is sort of focused on those projects that are in the queue right now. Is that
Right.
right?
Well, that's what's in the queue right now.
Right.
And the Next Generation Act does. I understand, and I'm still coming up to speed too with what's all in that act. But it's both has a distribution and a transmission, I think, component to it. And again, it's. My interest is, can we make sure that, or we do all we can to make an expeditious impact on storage for our state with those projects that hopefully would have, since they're a private developer, would have maybe minimal impact on ratepayers, other than whatever incentive that we might approved going forward, whether it's a full toll or a partial toll. That would be something that we could flesh out in a proceeding, a public proceeding. So, yeah. Believe me, I understand very much and actually agree with all your comments going forward for the MESI program. But again, it seems like there's this opportunity here. But we need to act quickly so that we can potentially get some of these projects that are proposed. But again,
Right.
they may need that extra incentive.
Yep. And I think one of the things your question calls into focus is this sort of the new timing that's dictated by the new legislation, and the fact that the transmission-connected procurements there are going to happen. I think the deadline for the initial transmission-connected procurement is the start of 2026, whereas with the front-of-the-meter distribution-connected procurements, those are sort of being placed on a faster track. And if I understand, you're sort of saying, should we also have a faster track procurement for these transmission-connected procurements, sort of under the banner of the Maryland Energy Storage Program, putting aside the future procurements that are to come. And I think we are still processing the legislation. I think, obviously it wasn't passed by both chambers of the General Assembly when we filed our comments.
Yeah, I understand.
And to Ms. Lewis's point, we were discussing before, well, is that something we should, try to address through post-hearing comments? I think if the commission decided to solicit post-hearing comments, we could provide sort of further thoughts on that, because we just didn't have the opportunity to really synthesize anything in all these new timelines. But I think in general, taking advantage of those existing projects that are in the queue and that could provide capacity value in the near term, I think OPC fully supports that. In terms of the details of the timing of that procurement, we may need to have a little more internal discussion to sort of figure out our final position. And Mr. Nguyen may have more thoughts on this.
I just want to add that the storage procurements, either through a full or partial toll arrangement, is not necessarily, you shouldn't think of it as an incentive necessarily. It's more of a way to hedge risk, in that it provides from the developer's perspective, it provides a kind of predictable revenue stream, and so they would get those contracted payments instead of participating directly in the wholesale markets and getting those revenues. From ratepayers' perspectives, those payments also provide a predictable, consistent amount of money to be spending, instead of being exposed to the ups and downs of the wholesale markets. And that's, we heard yesterday a lot about how that kind of predictability is important for projects to get built. And so whether individual projects are reasonable or beneficial to ratepayers would depend on, if we do an RFP and see the different bids that developers put in. And so I think the focus there is kind of trying to find the best deal for ratepayers.
And I agree. And it just this is an opportunity, obviously, to have this conversation, since this is all new information since this was announced. This hearing was announced, but I think it's probably important that we act quickly. One, because the legislation is pretty prescriptive on what we must do. And I think what we've learned is there are some opportunities here, and whether we call it incentive or just providing some of that, addressing risk. That's what I'm hearing, that while these projects are in the queue, it doesn't necessarily mean that as PGM starts to process the queue, that they're going to necessarily materialize. So it'd be good to I feel, test and see if we did something, we can maybe bring them along. Just as far as guidance on the the next generation, I'm sorry, the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative. I tend to agree that it is very also instructive that we've come up with a base, a BCA, and hopefully we can break through whatever the non-consensus is. There are certain things, obviously, the numbers, what can be continued, what revenues can be derived, that's a hard number, possibly what can be avoided with the costs of I can speak this morning, just the costs of the constraints in the system. But how do you, what guidance can we provide for some of the costs that maybe are a little more difficult to come up with some precise numbers? Again, so we can come up with a real potential impact on ratepayers. Do you have any instruction for us, I guess, on what we can provide to help the non-consensus that we're stuck at right now?
Yeah, I think something that would be helpful is requiring a alternatives analysis in these proposals, so we can see what the utilities, for example, are looking at and how they're deciding to give the commission one of these proposals, and what's going into their thought process, and how they can better understand what they're trying to achieve, and compare certain proposals with each other as a starting point, if that makes sense. So that really, in our view, what the goal of MESP is to be comprehensive and precise in the reasoning for these procurements. And I think something that can help achieve that is demonstrating that alternatives were considered. And what I mean by alternatives, I mean to say, for example, choosing to build a battery storage site over a build out for transmission lines or certain infrastructure like that, so that we can see that the storage has a greater value than an alternative proposal. So that is one consideration that we could provide, as well as for the more amorphous benefits, such as greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's something that absolutely should be taken into consideration. At the same time, that's difficult to measure, right? But if the commission encourages that be measured and thought about and considered, I think that impetus from the commission would encourage the participants in the work group to give more thought to that and discuss how that can be achieved. So I think that's something that we're looking for as well, because there are so many moving parts to this work group. Having more guidance as to what to focus on immediately is very important, especially because we need a framework to start with before we get too far ahead of ourselves and get proposals that aren't really proposals, that don't have as much detail as we need to get the achievements we want. So I think that's something we want to see as well.
Yeah, no, and I tend to agree. I think to see a proposal, ultimately we want to know what is the projected ratepayer impact,
Yeah.
and is it, hopefully we're doing this to try to come up with overall planning that will reduce customer costs, and if it's going to raise customer costs, then I think we need to know why, and is it worth it to move forward. I think those are some important things to ask. And then really, I mean, we know just from some of the presentations yesterday, utilities come to us and they clearly have a BCA for the shareholders. So how do we come up with that BCA for what we should expect ratepayers to pay for these essential services? And so just how we can get there. As you pointed out, there are some of those costs that are amorphous, but there are formulas out there that we could look to for greenhouse gas reductions and pollutants reduction, but also just try to get at if it's avoided of RMRs or immediate needs, transmission lines, and really some of the things that I think your office worked with Talos company, and they did come up with that, how we can really kind of subject these proposals to that kind of analysis would be helpful. So if you have anything post, of hearing that we can provide, I guess, to help break through any non-consensus here, because I personally believe that I think the BCA is important. And the other question really is around, kind of the utility participation, because I think we've heard from some of the developers they would like to work with utilities, and so there could be benefits there. Others that are concerned that they might be crowded out. So I guess any kind of guidance we can provide the work group to come up with a level playing field, I think, so that we can look at the risks. We can make sure that they're not all lopsided on the on ratepayers, but also allow and be open to ideas that would include utility involvement. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from all the testimony today or yesterday, that we should probably be open to, and also open to whether it's full tolling or partial tolling. Again, just whatever guidance you can provide in that area, and I think those were the issues I really wanted to cover. Do you have any, if you have any comments on any of those things, or questions that you think we should be asking, I'll just kind of leave it open for my last question.
Do you have anything, Tom? Yeah. Just one thing on the BCA. Yeah, we obviously agree that's a really important part of this, and there was some discussion yesterday about the appropriate timing of that analysis. I think one utility suggested that the appropriate time to really evaluate the cost effectiveness was at the project level. You do the procurement, you get requests, and then once those come in, you evaluate those. And that's important, but I think when you look at the statute that was just, or will presumably become a statute signed into law, SB 937, HB 1035, it's pretty clear that, when we're focusing on, I think, all parts, but the first tranche, the front of the meter distribution connected, that's the most immediate sort of thing. And I think it's pretty clear there that the plans that the utilities have to submit by November 1st of this year have to include BCAs. And so that plan will be, we want to procure like X number of megawatts, whatever the commission assigns as a target. Here are the problems we want to solve. We want to, focus on this distribution constraint. We want to try to shave off this, peak. So I think the utility should absolutely be in a position to provide that kind of benefit cost analysis at the plan level before we get to the individual projects. And in fact, that's required by the law. And I think in general, we may have to do further evaluations once we get specific projects. The commission will have to decide ultimately whether to approve these sorts of procurements. But yeah, having that initial analysis, providing for whatever uncertainties and running different scenarios as necessary, we think is important.
Great, thank you. And obviously for me, I'm interested only till July 1st. So whatever things that, I can work with my colleagues on whether it's, the MESI program or looking forward, toward the Next Generation Act, I'm kind of interested in those areas. After that, these are the only people that matter. So anyway, but thank you, and I appreciate your testimony and any other follow-up submissions you might have. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Barve.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So let's start with one thing. Listening to your testimony and kind of getting the vibe from it, I want to know, right from the baseline start, the utilities have basically proposed an 80-20 split as to battery storage for transmission versus distribution. I wonder if you have an objection or if you agree to that. What is your feel with respect to that rough 80-20 split?
I think we don't necessarily have an objection. We believe in storage as an asset, as something that can provide benefits to ratepayers and the grid as a whole. We definitely believe there are different concerns as far as the transmission level storage, specifically the PJM interconnection queue. And there are different benefits that can be achieved through distribution versus transmission, as we heard yesterday from some of the commenters. So I think what we primarily want to see is a surgical level of precision in the procurement proposals so that we have the necessary amount of detail to go forward with these plans and to combat anti-competitive behavior, to ensure that there is a level of value that's being achieved that makes these plans worth it. Because as you recall, in the pilot programs, some of those programs did not have positive BCAs and were met with lots of community opposition and general supply chain issues. And so we want to combat that at the start. And we believe the best way to do that is through a detailed assessment. So while we don't take a position on that split right now, we want to monitor their plans as we go forward.
Well, I have to disagree with you that a BCA will ameliorate local community opposition in any way, shape, or form, having had to deal with it for 32 years. But I guess a broader philosophical question that I have is, can we really be surgically so precise in a environment and in a market where the dynamics are changing. Let me explain what I mean by that. You've made the arguments of the pros, Mr. Nguyen, you've made the arguments of the pros and cons with respect to full tolling as opposed to partial tolling. And the impression I get from you is that full tolling is perhaps a safer way to protect from risk in an uncertain environment. But as we learn more and more and more, we can become more precise and go in for more partial tolling agreements. And so my question is, does it make sense to start off with full tolling and then move into more precise arrangements as we see how the market is behaving? Because I don't personally feel confident that I understand how the market's going to behave 6, 12, 24 months from now.
I'm a little hesitant to, agree completely with that. I think it's difficult to know. The full tolling arrangement does come with more protection against risk, but it also comes with a higher contract cost.
Right.
And to determine whether that increased cost is worth, you need to compare the risk you can predict to that cost, and without like getting bids in from developers yet, it's hard to say whether it's a good deal for ratepayers.
Well, isn't it safe to say, though, that our ability to assess risk today is going to be less good than our ability to assess risk a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, once we have more experience?
I think that's fair to say. Although a year from now, 2 years, like maybe more things will happen that
Yeah.
we don't know now. So it's hard to say. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me talk, since I'm in a broad philosophical mood right now, let me talk about the whole issue of benefit cost analyses globally, and say, I'm going to make a statement and I'd like you to respond to it. My impression is that storage is a uniquely different kind of an asset from transmission and from generation. It's been described as being the Swiss Army knife of the transmission distribution environment. And we are right now, we've been more or less directed to produce dispatchable power in large quantities in the state of Maryland. And I guess if we were being completely strict with respect to BCA, we just build 3 gigantic gas plants and call it a day. But that's not what the legislature wants. The legislature is very clear that they want us to pursue progress on these amorphous costs in the CSNA, for example. And so I suppose, are we putting ourselves, the question I have is, are we placing ourselves at a disadvantage by being too much of an accountant with respect to BCA and not taking into account the long-term benefits of having more storage on the system, so we won't have to build as many gas plants to achieve state goals?
I don't think so. We're not necessarily advocating for a strict number approach, and the regulations that were passed in RM 85 don't advocate for that either. They allow the commission to take into account other factors and provide a good amount of discretion to consider what is cost effective. With that said, I think with that discretion comes the ability to take into consideration what will happen in the long term. And because that's important as well, given the aggressive greenhouse gas statutes in the state of Maryland and the timelines on this statute. At the same time, we want to ensure that we are being wise and targeted about when and where these assets are developed and deployed. So I think it's not necessarily about a number, but what exactly is going into this framework? How do we define a benefit? What is a cost? And I think that's something that really needs to be established before we move forward with, okay, here's a project, let's go for it, without even considering and coming to a consensus about here are all the benefits that we want to see. And I know yesterday there was talk about, I believe it was BG&E, talking about, okay, which procurement checks the most boxes? Well, what are those boxes that need to be checked? And I think coming up with those criteria is a really important first step before we start checking the boxes. So I think that's more so what our comments and our position was getting at, rather than a hard number. We're not up here advocating for a 1.5 ratio on our BCA, because I think our office agrees that that would be too prescriptive and limiting. But we do want to see those criteria in place before moving forward.
Well, let me say this. Let me tell you what my former colleagues in the legislature are telling me, because I still hang out with them, and their attitude is, when in doubt, build the battery. That's what they're telling me. And the reason they're saying that, especially the ones who are more hardcore environmentalists, is because they see it as not just a way to, I mean, they made it easier for us to build solar. They did that this last year, and to build batteries. And my former colleagues in the legislature take a very interesting attitude now, or the ones I've spoken with so far, is that, not only is this good for the environment, but it even makes fossil plants more efficient, because you're not ramping up and down on their capacity. And if there's that weird moment in the middle of the day where nobody's using a lot of electricity and we're getting all the electrons from Calvert Cliffs, that even makes that part of the system cheaper. And so, my feeling is that I just, having spent 30 years in financial accounting management, I doubt our ability to be that precise. And so I think there are going to be rules of thumb like, when in doubt, build the battery. I think is a lot of environment. I think my friends at the Sierra Club are probably saying that right now. And even the ones at the Sierra Club I didn't care for. So I liked the vast majority of them. But so that's going to be my last comment here. And if you'd like to respond to that, I'd appreciate it, because I think we're going into an unknown territory, and I just don't think we're going to be able to use numbers and logic to guide all our decisions.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment, Commissioner. I think that something that is a priority for us to tackle is creating a market so people do want to build the batteries in Maryland, so that they're encouraged and incentivized to do so. Because it is a new market here in Maryland, we're not California, that already has a very robust energy storage market. And so how can we work together to achieve and encourage developers to work alongside the utilities to come and help us meet our goals and really make the energy market better in the long term within our state? So I think, with that, considering that, we do need to at least come up with some sort of framework that ensures that everyone is on the same page and gets the ball rolling, so that we can encourage that market to grow.
I've noticed that you guys mention California, but you don't mention Texas a lot, and they've had completely different approaches. Is that a fair thing for me to say, that that's your position, or have you not looked at it in those type of terms?
From what I understood from the comments yesterday, that there are fundamental differences between California and Texas. I think what we were envisioning is basing our approach on Connecticut, I believe, and that's something that we can dig more into and give you perhaps something after the hearing comparing, the various markets, because from my understanding, you're correct that Texas is very different from California. I imagine the goals of the state of Texas are also quite different than California, considering their oil industry. But thank you for bringing that up, and if that's something you'd like more information on, we're happy to provide it.
No. I
Okay.
really don't want to give you a homework assignment like
Thank
that
you.
necessarily. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barva, if I could just, add to Ms. Lewis's comments. I mean, your question about the, how strictly we follow the benefit cost analysis and how do we take into account benefits that perhaps we can't quantify right now, like the potential for market transformation, like the enablement of new renewables and the benefits that could flow from that enablement. I think that's been one of the really hard questions of this docket and will continue to be, and I don't know that there are easy one-size-fits-all ways to answer it. But one additional thought, and sort of following on the Swiss Army knife metaphor, Swiss Army knife has lots of different gadgets on it, right? And the question is, like, do you pull out the nail file, the scissors, the big knife, the small knife? And depending on which you're using, you can't get another one out. You may not be able to use that. There's a certain amount of path dependency with the use of that gadget, and so with storage as well. So one way to evaluate, are we going to see those benefits that maybe we can't quantify right now, is to sort of say, well, how are we going to use this storage in the near term? What potential additional benefits will that enable? And on the other hand, what additional benefits might that foreclose? So I think once we start getting more concrete proposals to understand how this storage is going to be used, is it focused on capacity and sort of shaving off peaks? Is it focused on avoiding distribution system upgrades? Then we'll have a better sense of, I think, of what additional benefits could come from these projects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So, sort of following up from Commissioner Barve, I am concerned about being a slave to BCA, and I'm particularly concerned about situations where BCA comes in at the end as a justification. We want to do this, and now we're going to do a BCA to make sure that we're justified in what we're doing. I think I mentioned yesterday that storage is a tool, like the Swiss Army knife. There are lots of different tools. Sometimes, several tools can be used at the same time, but they are a tool to address an issue. And when you're addressing the issue, it seems to me at that point, you need to identify where the benefits lie. I mean, so on some level, we may end up doing sort of several benefit cost analysis that's kind of dynamic. And so that initial, why are we doing this? Where are the constraints? What can we do to address those? How will customers benefit? That has to be identified in the beginning. Where do the benefits lay for customers? That can't come in at the end, because the whole point of this is that we're trying to fix things. And when you're fixing things, presumably you're going to have benefits from the fix. And so you can't do that at the end. And so I think when these proposals come in, there needs to be, I mean, you don't have to call it an official BCA, but you need to identify what benefits customers are getting. And they may get different benefits from different proposals, and that's where we will balance those. And they may all be positive, but some are more positive than others. But I think we can't be a slave to the BCA. It cannot come in at the end. It has to be part of the process and part of the proposal. I actually am wondering about BCA on the transmission side. There are BCAs, and PJM does BCAs. But from our perspective as Maryland commissioners, we need to be concerned about the benefits and the costs to Maryland ratepayers. Can you do a BCA on the projects, for example, in the PJM queue? Can you do that from a Maryland perspective? Is that possible?
I don't see a reason why it's not. I think going back to the point for the projects that are already in the queue versus projects that are not in the queue yet. I think in a BCA analysis, you can weight those projects that are already in the queue that could come online sooner, give them a higher weighting compared to projects that are not in the queue yet.
But if those projects have benefits to others, other than Maryland ratepayers, but Maryland ratepayers are going to cover the cost totally, how do we do that analysis? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do.
Okay,
And-
and I'm not really clear. I mean, I can understand a BCA for a distribution side proposal where ratepayers are kicking in some of the costs. And I understand the point of doing a BCA for transmission projects where the costs of the projects are going to be presumably part of the rates that all ratepayers are paying. But if we have a tolling agreement or partial tolling agreement where Maryland customers could, on some level, I mean, depending on where we go, pay the full freight, are carrying the risks for those projects and are only getting some of the benefit. How do you do a benefit cost analysis there?
I think in those situations, that's where the weighting comes in and these alternative analyses. So if there is another project that achieves the same goal, say, for example, peak shaving and attempting to reduce capacity prices, then you would weight that other alternative higher than that one that overburdens Maryland ratepayers and allows for that has a free riding problem. I think that in those situations,
It's not a free riding problem. I mean, basically, we're covering, in that situation, we're gonna subsidize ratepayers in Pennsylvania and Maryland.
right. And what I was referring to is that the ratepayers in Pennsylvania would be free riding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas you don't have a problem if it's truly third party and Maryland customers are not kicking in anything. So,
Don, did you have
Mr. Nguyen, is that the Nguyen?
Win.
Nguyen.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I can just add to that real quick. So let's say under a partial or full toll agreement for transmission connected storage, if you're contracting for the capacity value, either of those arrangements would include capacity usually. So any capacity revenues from PJM goes to Maryland ratepayers because those are the terms of the contract. To the extent and
Yeah, but then you've got ratepayers that are taking the risk that there's going to be some cost recovery for them in the capacity market. What happens if the capacity market goes in the other direction? I mean, now the Maryland ratepayers will do well. It goes in the other direction, and I mean, I'm a little concerned about Maryland ratepayers sort of taking on the risk of being participants in a capacity market. Is that really our role? I don't have to answer that question. As we're sort of thinking about these questions, and we're thinking about pricing, which again gets this question about how do we price all of this stuff. I'm just wondering what's the appropriate role for Maryland ratepayers when we're dealing with the transmission side. I sort of have a better handle on the distribution side of it. So,
Can I have another bite at the apple?
please.
Actually, Commissioner Suchman brings up a point, but let me ask this. I mean, Maryland is a state that has, for the last 30 years, deliberately chosen not to build generation for one reason or another. Is having to build batteries just the price we have to pay for not having built generation? Because if it's true that Maryland ratepayers are going to bear the brunt of these transmission-connected batteries, that wouldn't have been a problem if we'd been building generation in the interior of our state. Isn't that right? I mean, is that maybe just the price we have to pay for 30 years of neglect?
Commissioner Sutton, or Barbie, I can weigh in. That's a hard question to answer. I mean, let me approach it this way, just talking about the, what the legislature has directed, in the new legislation regarding transmission-connected procurement.
Sure.
To some extent, the commission has more discretion there. It's up to 1,600 megawatts. There's no specific, amount that has to be procured subject to the, terms and conditions and limitations of the statute. On the other hand, that has to be read together with the, still effective 3,000 megawatt goal in
Dispatchable.
right. Well, and then there's a dispatchable, right? And that's another wrinkle. I mean, our read of that new, I think it's 1201 and the statutes that follow, is that we're not going to see transmission-connected procurement, transmission-connected storage procured pursuant to that because of the ELCC limitation in the statute. It's 65%. I think right now that would make even 8-hour storage unable to be procured. And I think we've heard from a couple parties that those ELCC values are likely to go down rather than up in PJM. So I guess the good news is that the Commission has a fair amount of discretion with respect to procurement of the transmission-connected resources, regardless of why we're in this position, why it is that developers have chosen to build more power plants. I mean, in Pennsylvania, the state has seen such a boom. Almost all the power plants built there have been gas power plants, and it's because they're so close to all this supply of fracked gas.
Right.
And it's just going to be more and Pennsylvania hasn't been participating in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which provides another reason for developers to site across the border. So I think from my perspective, that largely answers the question about why so much of the new thousands of megawatts developed in the last 10 years or so has gone into Pennsylvania and other states instead of Maryland. But one specific question that came up yesterday around transmission-connected procurement was, well, what does the Commission do now? We have this statute that says, basically the legislature has made the decision that for that up to 1,600 megawatts, that is under the partial tolling agreement. But some parties have said, well, in addition, the Commission should proceed with, other transmission-connected procurements now under the full tolling mechanism. And so the Commission has a big decision to make on that question. And again, OPC's position is let's compare them. Let's have proposals go in that enable us to see, with the uncertainty accompanying each regarding what happens in the markets, how those compare to each other. Because the uncertainties are, some are same, some are different. And then there's also the question of the timing. Again, under the statute, the Commission has to start the first 800 megawatt, up to 800 megawatt transmission-connected procurement, I think, by January 1st, 2026. That's a ways away. The Commission could choose to do it earlier. The Commission could choose to line that up with the first dispatchable and large capacity procurement, which is happening much sooner. So there are a lot of questions on that front, which again, OPC has not fully discussed internally, given just the fact that this legislation
It's
just
a lot.
passed. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Nguyen, last question relates to visibility, and I've been sort of wondering through several different proceedings the level of visibility that the utilities have on their system. So, I mean, I've been told that they have SCADA systems that are in place that give them visibility on sort of what's going on. Obviously, the storage will not be effective if the utilities don't have visibility in terms of what's going on in the system. So, can you give me a little sort of deeper dive on that? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the level of visibility they have on their system?
So I am not super familiar with
Okay.
the Maryland Utilities capabilities right now. I would have to look into that more.
Okay, but you agree that if you don't have good visibility, it's very hard to be able to effectively use the storage to address peaks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And visibility refers to both seeing where the constraints are and also real time if there's storage sited at those locations. If those storage assets are, dispatching at those right times, because if your peak occurs midday and the storage is dispatching at 5 p.m., that doesn't help address your constraints. So there's both. And yeah, I'm not super familiar with.
Okay, but the utilities are super familiar. So I'm hoping utilities hearing this, and putting in their next round, will address this issue, because without good visibility on the system, it's going to be hard to effectively use these storage units.
Yeah, exactly. And the point of my comments earlier was just to make sure that we know that they know.
No, I appreciate that. So, okay, that's all we have. Thank you. Mr. Prokowski, our last panel.
Okay, we have staff, Mike Dean, DeAndre Wilson, Jason Justy, and Dan Hurley.
Okay. And I just want to be clear, there's nobody else that's waiting to speak. I mean,
After this is the last presentation.
right, but I just wanted to make sure there is nobody here that thinks that they're speaking. But, okay, so I know you're speaking.
DeAndre, you can forward the slides using this. Can I ask that you do this, because I'm going to have to run. I am. I'm just having some problems here with allergies.
Gotcha. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. DeAndre Wilson on behalf of staff. With me, I have Anson Gisty, Dan Hurley, and Michael Dean on behalf of staff as well. On January 22nd, 2025, the Maryland Public Service Commission issued order number 91495 and case number 959715, directing the investor-owned electric companies to file proposals for an initial set of cost-effective energy storage initiatives that shall address, at a minimum, the prospective timeline of the procurement through expected commercial operation, the amount of the energy storage procurement, and the other factors addressed in the MESI Work Group Phase 1 final report, necessary to inform a commission decision on an energy storage procurement allocation to meet the first MESI goal of 750 megawatts of energy storage capacity by May 31st, 2028. The following are staff's comments to the energy storage procurement initiatives proposed by Potomac Edison and the Exelon utilities. We first want to start with an overview of the proposals that the utilities have provided. In accordance with the order, Potomac Edison proposal includes a third-party owned distribution connected energy storage procurement of 600 megawatts. The company proposes to procure its energy storage capacity target through a request for proposal process and will exercise the option to rescope and issue the RFP should there be limited interest or responses to any RFP issuance. The company did not propose a transmission level initiative as part of its procurement proposal. The company did provide a proposed timeline of 30 months. Next, we have proposals that were submitted by the Exelon Utilities, which included BGE, Pepco, and Delmarva. The Exelon Utilities submitted two proposals. The first was a joint proposal with the Solar Energy Industries Association. This proposal, the first of these two proposals, proposes a jointly procurement up to 150 megawatts of utility-owned and front-of-the-meter, third-party owned distribution-level energy storage assets of various configurations and applications through the creation of separate cost-effective competitive solicitations on an annual basis. The second proposal is a proposal to procure up to 600 megawatts of both front-of-the-meter and behind-the-meter distribution-connected and transmission-connected utility-owned and third-party-owned energy storage across 6 procurement initiatives. Neither of the proposals that were proposed by the Exelon Utilities provided an in-depth timeline as per the Commission's order. Potomac Edison did provide a 30-month timeline, but was not fully, staff did not feel that it was pretty detailed or not very detailed as to the steps that would be taken to provide a 2027 delivery year. Yesterday we did see a proposal presentation that provided a little bit more detail than what was provided in the proposals, and that was something along the lines of what we expected. So at this point, we would, in regards to a timeline, we would want to see the utilities provide a pretty much more detailed guideline as to how they would acquire or procure these energy storage projects and to meet the 2027 delivery year. The utilities, in their proposals, the utilities requested that the Commission approve the implementation of a budget cap of each of their proposed energy storage procurement initiatives based on $1 per megawatt or $1 per megawatt hour or some other methodology. While a Commission directed cost-effective budget cap for the proposed energy storage procurement initiatives may have its benefits, an allocation methodology based solely on dollars per megawatt or dollars per megawatt hours may not promote cost-effectively optimizing all of the benefits that energy storage can provide to the electric system. To provide the Commission with an overall perspective of what the implementation of a budget cap. The next few slides are just we're going to talk about the allocation of the energy storage cap targets that have been presented by proposed by the utilities, and additional analysis that staff has presented in regards to the allocation of these caps.
So in the staff comments, we showed the outcomes of the Exelon proposal to allocate energy storage capacity across its 3 territories based on energy sales applied to the 4 utilities with proposals. This table shows how a 750 megawatt of cost-effective energy storage would be allocated, and staff supports a use-based allocation to ensure cost burdens are borne equitably by all the utilities. Next slide, please. Breaking down further from there, from the total goal allocation into grid level allocations and capital asset ownership type allocations, this table shows how the utility proposals would allocate the capacity targets. The Exelon utilities proposed at least 30% of their target to be allocated to third-party owned devices, 30% to utility-owned devices, and the remaining 40% to be allocated with flexible consideration. Not included in this table beneath the utility or third-party owned capital asset ownership conversation, an energy storage device could be utility operated or third-party operated, and it could be behind the meter or in front of the meter. So as currently proposed, the Exelon utility ratepayers would bear the primary responsibility for pursuing Maryland's first energy storage target. I think yesterday the Potomac Edison Company indicated a willingness to come up from their proposal to balance that out. Next slide, please. So since comments were filed, HB 1035 or SB 937 passed in both chambers. In that legislation, there was a state goal for at least 150 megawatts of distribution-connected front-of-the-meter energy storage that's solidified. So this goal would not include a program such as a behind-the-meter residential program that was proposed by the utilities and has been discussed as especially useful for the medically vulnerable community. In reference to this goal, the law would establish service load or other criteria as the method of allocation, and the law would require both types of device ownership and 30% owned by a third party. It does not specify any goal for utility ownership. On the transmission side, there's limited new information on how to allocate transmission level storage in comparison to distribution level storage among the utilities or between ownership or operation structures. But it does require the Commission to issue procurement solicitations for front-of-the-meter transmission. Next slide, please. So the service load allocation method specified in the law is an ambiguous term, and staff does believe it could be interpreted to mean energy sales, but it could also be in reference to peak demand or average demand. So for this example, we've taken the 2024 gross peak forecast provided by the utilities in the most recent 10-year plan. At this time, we don't know the actuals for 2024 yet. So this table takes that same example allocation, 750 megawatt total target, 150 megawatt distribution level minimum goal, third-party ownership goal of 30%. And we use the same 30-30-40% utility-owned, third-party owned flexible ownership allocation for the example. So one consequence of applying these considerations to the allocation, going with a peak demand versus a sales demand or sales quantity, BGE would end up with a relatively smaller allocation of total capacity, and PEPCO would take on a larger allocation. Potomac Edison's distribution proposal would have to change to include utility ownership, and the total amount of capacity deployment, as mentioned, would have to increase in Potomac Edison to comply with HB 1035. So this is the information we've been able to quantify based on the available information in bills. Other qualitative considerations related to expectations for future progress toward decarbonization goals that staff has been able to identify are in these next 3 slides. Next slide, please. So this slide is a clause in the PUA regarding offshore wind and transmission system build-out to accommodate it. So given this in the context of these proceedings toward stated energy storage policy goals, for any transmission level energy storage deployed in DPL, that would be likely to represent progress toward 2 stated goals with 1 action, efficient movement there. It is also possible that energy storage deployed in other more inland locations could also support offshore wind interconnection. Next slide, please. And this is the context slide for the transmission build-out in Maryland. As you can see, and I think has been discussed quite a bit in the past, there aren't any 500 kV large transmission lines in the Delmarva Peninsula. There are some 230 kV lines in the area, and the rest of the transmission capacity is in smaller lines. Next slide, please. And then in the solar sector, the left side shows the distribution of energy generating plants in a map from the Energy Information Administration. On the right side is data also from the EIA regarding capacities and counts of solar plants larger than 1 megawatt. So starting on the top right, as of the February 2025 data publication, about 39% of the capacity of solar plants larger than 1 megawatt in Maryland were located in the Maryland side of the Delmarva Peninsula on the eastern shore. And then of the capacity the EIA anticipates to come online between now and the end of 2026, that's larger than 1 megawatt, about 63% of that capacity is expected in the Eastern Shore. And we can also consider the count of plants in the bottom right. Currently, it's about 20% of plants located in the Eastern Shore, and then half of what's anticipated is expected in the Delmarva Peninsula. Next slide.
Next, staff will discuss the utilities proposal of a procurement initiative budget cap. In their proposals, both Potomac Edison and the Exelon Utilities have requested that the Commission approve the implementation of a budget cap for each of their proposed energy storage procurement initiatives based on $1 per megawatt or $1 per megawatt hour or some other methodology. While a Commission-directed cost-effective budget cap for the proposed energy storage procurement initiatives may have its benefits, an allocation methodology based solely on $1 per megawatt or $1 per megawatt hour may not promote cost-effectively optimizing all of the benefits energy storage can provide to the electric system. To provide the Commission with an overall perspective of what the implementation of a budget cap, staff did a little analysis using the project cost data reported by the utilities for the energy storage pilot projects currently operational and enrolled in Maryland's energy storage pilot program to calculate the total $1 per megawatt for each of the operational models proposed by the utilities. I must detail that this is an updated table based on staff's comments that were filed. At the time that staff's comments were filed, the metric reports for the pilot projects had not been filed. So shortly after the filing of those metric reports, the staff pulled some data from those and updated the table. One of the updates includes the inclusion of the Town Hill project. As you can see, all of the projects are an example or mirror the types of proposals that were provided in these filings. The staff calculated an average $1 per megawatt of $4.65 million per megawatt based on the total cost project data that was total project costs that were reported in the most recent metrics report. With that, staff calculated what an estimated procurement budget cap would be for 750 megawatts based on that average, and staff calculated a $3.5 billion estimate. Staff just wants to point out that this is not us advocating for a budget cap, but we're providing analysis in order to support what a budget cap could possibly be. So we want to repeat that again before we go on to the next slide. Staff is not advocating a budget cap, but we're providing the Commission with some analysis to help support if a decision to either provide a budget cap or not, or just to provide eyes. So with that, in order to do a comparison of the estimates, we used the National Renewable Energy Laboratories 2024 Electric Annual Technology Baseline Tool to obtain some benchmark energy storage project cost data, which was developed for the purpose of documenting normalized technology costs and performance assumptions using published sources. And this is a picture of the spreadsheet, the workbook that they have on the website. And as you can see, the numbers that we use are for a 60 megawatt, 240 megawatt hour utility scale battery storage project for 4 hours. And these are 2024 data that we used here. And with that data, based on our analysis, staff calculated an average dollar per megawatt of 4 as we can see here, based on the data, it's $1,938 per kilowatt for a moderate estimate that they provided on the table. Based on that data, staff calculated a $1.5 billion estimate for a 750 megawatt procurement. Again, staff is not advocating a budget cap, but we're just providing a little data to show a comparison as to what a budget cap could possibly look like using just some standard data. Now we want to make sure that you take into consideration that the difference between this estimate and what we've calculated based on the energy storage pilot projects could be due to several factors, including the difference in assumption inputs that may have been used, and the fact that the project costs reported by the utilities for the pilot program could have been inflated due to the impact of COVID-19 and some other substantial updates or supply chain issues that they may have been faced with. Now, if the commission were to approve an implementation of a budget cap for energy storage procurement, staff would suggest that the commission consider developing a well-structured model based on a value-driven approach that prioritizes state policy goals, optimizes grid benefits, and avoided costs with the flexibility to adjust with evolving market conditions and grid needs. The commission could also consider taking a balanced approach by partially approving the implementation of a procurement budget cap based on performance metrics that require periodic compliance filings to evaluate cost effectiveness and efficiency, or specifically designate portions of the budget cap to competitive solicitations, possibly for third-party projects or procurements, or some other means that the commission may see or feel is appropriate. Next, staff will provide some comments on the cost recovery mechanism and cost benefit analysis. Currently, as it relates to the cost recovery mechanisms, Potomac Edison has suggested or proposed a surcharge with an annual reconciliation, and Exelon has proposed a regulatory asset or multi-year plan or traditional rate case as a cost recovery mechanism. Now, although staff does not have a particular recommendation for an appropriate cost recovery mechanism at this time, staff does note that it may be beneficial to consider whether cost recovery should be based on performance-based cost recovery mechanisms as an alternative if the commission decides that it does not want to or feel that a multi-year or a traditional rate case is appropriate for these for the project or initial proposals. Now, in regards to cost benefit analysis, staff supports the utilities proposal that costs be tracked similar to the methodology established in the energy storage pilot program, including continued interaction with the Empower Evaluation Advisory Work Group, which was an original recommendation from the Energy Storage Pilot Program Work Group. And we also want the CBA to consider any recommendations that may come out of the Phase 2 MESP work group, the Energy Storage Work Group, collaboration with the Unified Benefit Cost Analysis Work Group that is required to provide their report by December 20th, 25. Now, these last few slides are just a few considerations that we feel the commission should consider in regards to some of these projects. So some of the first consideration is in regards to the Exelon's behind the meter distribution connected residential project. First, the proposal does not detail potential financial benefits associated with the asset being used in a VPP or its potential to operate the wholesale market, and what benefits, if any, will be extended to the customer. For example, in the form of a payment program or a pay down of the cost of the asset, since the customer will become the owner of the asset at the conclusion of the contract. Second, staff believes there could be a potential challenge with the program, specifically that a customer would move into a home that is already participating in the program and become responsible for the remainder of the payments. Thirdly, the proposal also does not make mention of any manufacturer warranties or guarantees that the company will provide to the customer or extend to the customer that's participating in the initiative. Lastly, the Exelon utilities propose to have the participants of this initiative or host customer commit to paying a fixed monthly rate for the device over a 10-year period. To help avoid causing any potential financial burden on the customers and ensure affordability that will promote customer participation, the company could utilize a similar method used by the Elk Neck project or VPP project that is currently participating in the pilot program, where they've surveyed the customers to determine a reasonable fixed payment that the customers would pay in order to participate in the project, in order to for ownership of the asset. Exelon does not specify how they will determine what that fixed payment rate is, but staff would encourage the utility to utilize some of the same methods in order to determine that price point. And finally, in order for the staff would suggest or will recommend the commission consider prescribing selection criteria to the utilities procurement solicitations in order to ensure the best value for ratepayers, prioritize economic and operational efficiency, and have the capability to provide grid benefits that align with the state's goals. Here we have just a few. Of course, we want the utilities to, the selection criteria to be a least cost approach, but there are also some non-price factors that they can consider in their selection criteria. Here we provided just a few: round trip efficiency, degradation rates, response time, effective load carrying capability, carbon abatement cost per megawatt hour stored, operational flexibility, and the ability of the resource to scale. In conclusion, staff looks forward to the utilities filing more fulsome reports that outline each of their procurement initiatives with greater detail and address some of the issues identified by staff and stakeholders, with the flexibility and providing the utilities with the flexibility to enhance or revise their respective program proposals through additional filings. That concludes staff's presentation, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Barve?
No, I don't think so.
Commissioner Richard?
Hopefully, I won't take as much time as I have been taking. But you heard my questioning to OPC. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all. Just my interest in looking to the Next Generation Act as possibly a way to maybe accelerate some of these opportunities that are for us now in the PGMQ. And I mean, do you agree or disagree that these capacity resources, which at least we could find out if they really are, available or could be available in the next couple of years, would address some of the capacity deficit we have right now that led to some of the, from the deactivations that have led to some of the capacity auction prices. I mean, would that be something that would immediately provide some potential relief over the next several years if we could get some of these capacity resources online?
I think there is definitely a benefit to exploring these resources, and by further evaluating those resources based on their viability, what contingencies they could possibly address in the state of Maryland, and utilizing the selection criteria, modifying or prescribing a selection criteria that can help evaluate those things better, I think would be beneficial to the state of Maryland.
Okay, and some of their benefits we won't know until, unfortunately, the way the PGM process works, until they actually exist. But if they were available, they potentially, do you agree, could address some of the violations that PGM says would exist or will exist once the Brandon Shores Wagner plants are offline, are deactivated. Would the process we would go through, such as, like, along the lines, I guess, we went through the offshore wind OREC process, be something to at least provide the information to the commission about, are these developers really interested in committing to any type of a contract? Are they truly capable of having these online? I mean, I think Commissioner Suchman asked about the impacts on tariffs. There could be supply chain issues, but would the process of having a procurement, competitive procurement, help us to actually find out what's out there and give us some ideas of what the cost would be, the incentivizing costs or de-risking costs would be to the state?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Finding out more information about these projects, getting an assessment from the electric utilities as to what the needs are on contingencies on their particular grids, getting more information from them on that, and how those projects can address those. I think having a proceeding to get more information would definitely be helpful and provide an opportunity to further evaluate those projects for possibly addressing some of Maryland's needs.
Okay, and with those, if some of these projects materialized, would they contribute to the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative, some of those goals?
I'm sorry, what's that?
If those projects were actually constructed, would they contribute to the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative goals?
I think
These
they could.
transmission side goals, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they could definitely contribute to the transmission side, but again, with further further discussion or more information about those projects, I'm sure we can make that determination.
Yeah, no, and that would be the reason for the competitive procurement. But if any of them were built, would they all qualify for at least the goals set out by the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative?
I can't. At this moment, I can't say if they all would qualify. I would probably need to further vet those projects or get more information about each of these particular projects.
Okay, so it's possible. So you're saying that there are projects, storage projects, or hybrid, storage solar projects that would not qualify for, toward the goals set out by the Maryland Energy Storage Initiative?
Well, without further information about the particular projects that are on the queue, I can't speak on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, Mr. Wilson, thank you for actually answering my question, which I was going to ask, of how much and in sort of broad terms, the Exelon proposal was gonna cost ratepayers. Because, I mean, we did have a budget for PE, but we didn't have one for Exelon, and so the numbers are a little jaw-dropping, you know, whether you're talking about 3 billion or almost 2 billion. It's actually really good to have those numbers as a sort of a way of testing what it is that we're trying to accomplish. It doesn't reflect, it's only costs. It doesn't reflect benefits. But it just seems to me that once these proposals are actually better fleshed out and we're sort of looking at them, understanding what the costs will be, how the utility is expecting to recover those costs, what's the mechanism in place, should the ratepayers have to pay, or is there an alternative? I mean, all of these need to be fleshed out, because we can't approve something that's going to cost the ratepayers $3 billion or $2 billion. I mean, I think, or at least I don't want to see that. So I think that is kind of the message to the utilities, is I actually really, I underlined this, and then you repeated it twice in your filing. An allocation methodology based solely on dollars per megawatt or megawatt hour may put the commission at a disadvantage, as each metric provides different insight as to how to value energy storage. And that's the key. How do we value energy storage? It cannot just be, it's easy to just sort of say, let's just do it based on megawatt or megawatt hour, but we really need to be clear about what it is we're trying to accomplish, and we need to price it in a way that makes sense and doesn't burden or overly burden the ratepayer. So I did really like that you've sort of pointed that out, and I really appreciate that you gave us some numbers to just kind of remind us that this is, I mean, storage is really good, but understand that it's also very expensive. So we need to do it in a judicious manner that gives us what we need, but doesn't overburden the ratepayers. So, thank you. Several of you have been asked by us to provide some additional information, and I know that OPC has raised the possibility today of perhaps post-hearing comments, and so we're going to leave the record open for a week. Based on what we talked about over the last 2 days, if there's other information that you would like to provide for commission consideration, or respond to whatever one of us has asked, please do that within the next week, and then we'll be issuing an order on next steps. If anybody has anything otherwise, this hearing is adjourned.